From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you in the program. Star Attraction. Brazil populist and poster boy takes center stage at the World Economic Forum. Davos disruptors. Human Rights Watch claps back at autocratic leaders. Darren McCaffrey has our special series. Rising risks amid new economic warnings. Is Europe better prepared to weather a downturn? Space race. The fresh call for Europe to take its place as a global space power. And victim of victory, Donald Tusk reminisces about David Cameron and his handling of Brexit. Well, it is time to meet our panelists for tonight. We have joining us Andrew Byrne. He is Brussels correspondent for the Sunday Times. Andrew, good to see you again. Which of these stories are you watching closely? Well,
I'm watching Davos very closely, and this idea that Bolsonaro, the great anti-elitist, could in fact be the star of the show of the most elitist gathering on earth. It's quite a turn of events.
Isn't that ironic? All right, also joining us tonight is John Worth. He's a lecturer in EU negotiations at the College of Europe. What are you watching, John?
I've also got my own Davos here, also the fears about whether there'll be an economic downturn and what the leaders are going to be saying there, and also how other leaders come to terms with Bolsonaro's presence. That's what's most interesting for me today.
All right. And also with us in the studio is Miriam Dalli. She's a Maltese MEP with the Socialists and Democrats group. What about you, Miriam?
I'm also following Davos, but in particular, I'm interested in the link between climate change and the economy, and also the fact that there were these statements about the downturn that the world economy might be taken, but also how this can relate to climate change. Obviously, today as well, the Brazilian Prime Minister. Yeah,
clearly a lot of things are going on in Davos, and that's exactly where we will begin our show tonight. Day one of the World Economic Forum in Davos, and the international debut for Jair Bolsonaro, as we've already heard, Brazil's far-right president. He is the newest member of a growing global club of populist leaders, and he chose Davos for his first international trip since being elected. With the absence of U.S. President Donald Trump, he has become the main attraction there. And today he delivered a speech to political and business leaders, and here is what he had to say before that speech.
Nós queremos mostrar, via nosso ministro em especial, que o Brasil está tomando medidas para que o mundo restabeleça a confiança em nós, que os negócios voltem a florescer entre o Brasil e o mundo, sem o viés ideológico, que nós podemos ser um país seguro para investimentos e, em especial, a questão do agronegócio, que é muito importante para nós.
Well, Raw Politics is also in Davos right now. We have our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is there following all of the latest developments on the world's political and business elite this week, joining us in the cold there. Hi, Darren. All right, so what did Jair Bolsonaro say in that speech of his?
Well, I think, Tessa, if Donald Trump was last year's bad boy of Davos, that Davos kind of loves the hate, it definitely is Bolsonaro this year. He had a message that many here in Davos, of course, would like, and it's all about trying to open up the Brazilian economy. He talked about how it was relatively closed at the moment. He wanted to reduce and simplify taxes, privatise assets, and give his new Justice Minister the tools to tackle corruption. That is great news to many of the businesses gathered here. Many have seen Brazil's economy essentially stumble over the last couple of years. They would want to see a more prosperous, more open Brazil. So they are, of course, very happy to hear that message. But a bit like Donald Trump, they are slightly concerned with a populist Bolsonaro as well, a man who, what is one of his first acts in government is essentially to relax the gun controls in Brazil so that Brazilians can more easily access guns. Now, 64,000 people were murdered by guns in Brazil last year. Many say what the country does not need is more guns, but it's a sign that he is not willing to step away from that populist agenda. So, as I say, a bit like Donald Trump last year, he's definitely the main attraction, but someone that they may well love to hate. In saying that, it's not all populist leaders or indeed politicians here at Davos. We had a bit of glitter as well. Tessa, on the Magic Mountain today. We saw Prince William interview Sir David Attenborough about the environment, in which Sir David Attenborough warned that entire ecosystems could be wiped out if the planet and businesses carry on the way they are going. And in addition to that, I somewhat kind of managed to bump into Matt Damon, the Hollywood actor. He was talking about water sustainability today. So clearly, it is a big range of topics to discuss here at Davos, with definitely a big range of people talking about them too.
Different personalities indeed, and you are doing, in fact, a special series on disruptors. So who exactly are these disruptors? Who have you been talking to?
Well, today I caught up with Kenneth Roth. He is the Managing Director of Human Rights Watch, who's somewhat of a disruptor in himself, someone who has been challenging governments around the world for the last couple of decades about their human rights. And this year, following on, of course, from the rise of populism, most notably in Europe, but indeed elsewhere in the world, what can we expect from 2019? Is it going to be more of the same? Or is it going to be, as Kenneth Roth suggests, that populists are now starting to face a bit of a populist backlash themselves? Let's have a listen to the interview I conducted with them a little bit earlier. I believe this is your 19th year to Davos, quite an extraordinary record. Just how's it changed over that time?
Well, it's gotten bigger, more people come, and I have to say, it is unique in the world. I mean, if you want to come and deliver a message to people in power, whether governmental officials or CEOs, this is the place to be. It's the most efficient place to deliver that message and make sure that it's heard by the people who matter.
In saying that, we are looking at 2019 here in Davos, the start of the year. Are we going to see more of what we saw in 2018, which, particularly in Europe and elsewhere in the world, saw the continuous rise of populist leaders?
Well, you're right to note that that's what the headlines are all about, the emergence of the Orbans or Trumps of the world. But I think the real news of the last year has been the resistance that these autocrats have spawned. And if you look just in Europe, I mean, people took to the streets in Poland to force the government to reverse its efforts to undermine the independence of the judiciary. In Hungary, they took to the streets and are fighting back today against Orban's so-called slave law, which will force people to work overtime and not get paid for 3 years. And you're seeing things like that around the world. I mean, people went to the voting booths and ousted the corrupt autocrat in Malaysia, in Armenia, in the Maldives. I mean, Ethiopia, popular pressure led to the emergence of a reformist prime minister who's doing very good things. But I think what's interesting to me is even in the toughest situations, even Syria, Yemen, Myanmar, for other Rohingya, we've seen the international community come together. This is without the United States, which is, Trump, he just wants to embrace the autocrats. It's without the UK, which has been preoccupied by Brexit. But we see a series of smaller, medium-sized governments coming together and, for example, forcing Putin to agree to a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib province rather than indiscriminately slaughter 3 million civilians.
That may well be true, but we're also continuing to see populists elected. And we have had a whole series of elections, again, particularly in Europe over the last year, in which even if populists haven't won power, they have won seats in parliaments across the continent.
Yeah. No, there's no question that the populists are responding to genuine grievances. Concern about globalization, concerns about technological change. Some people don't like the cultural changes that come with immigration. I think the populists have a problem when they start to govern and face reality. But what we're also seeing is that there's a pushback to the autocrats because there's sort of an autocrat playbook. They all use the same one. They get into power by demonizing some minority. They then start chipping away at the checks and balances on their authority. So they attack the journalists, they attack the activists, they attack the judges. And people are seeing that, that leads to corrupt, unaccountable government that serves the leader but not the people, and they're fighting back against that.
In saying that, one of the things that obviously also plays into populism is potentially economic weakness. Many would say this has happened because of the financial crisis of 2008. But we're now again looking at a slowing global and European economy. Again, couldn't that be a boost to those populists?
I think the populists undoubtedly would try to exploit economic weakness. But what we've seen is that, when you get a populist in power who basically stops answering to the people, they spend money on their perpetuation of power. So somebody like Orban in Hungary, he's building football stadiums at the same time you can't even go to a hospital without bringing your own medicine and toilet paper. They invest in their own power base, not on their people. That's why accountable governments are important. That's why democracy in its full terms, with freedom of the press, with freedom to be activists, with an independent judiciary, that's why that matters.
Just finally, what should we look out for this year? what are the key people or the key moments that may well shape 2019?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, there is a battle underway. The populists, are continuing to rise, but there is pushback. So I think we have to look, for example, at how does the world respond to the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, after the murder of Khashoggi, after his bombing and starving of millions of Yemeni civilians. Are they going to start finally pushing back against him, or are they going to let Saudi money buy his continued respect? And you see examples like that around the world too. Sisi in Egypt, Erdogan in Turkey, Duterte in Philippines. These are the real tests looking forward.
And just very finally, we like to play this kind of little game where we ask you, I'll say something, and just the first word that pops into your head. Mm-hmm. So, Davos.
The elite.
What about Viktor Orban?
Bad news.
Emmanuel Macron?
A disappointment.
Donald Trump?
Dangerous.
Theresa May?
Weak and going nowhere.
Giuseppe Conte?
We hope for more.
And finally, Vladimir Putin?
A dangerous man.
Or maybe 2019?
Let's hope for the better one next year.
It is interesting, actually, I think, Tessa, that the possibility of this global economic downturn, which everyone here at Davos is concerned about, could help, as we were talking about there, fan the flames of populism across Europe and indeed the rest of the world. It must be said that there are a whole range of other issues being talked about. Tomorrow, somewhat moves to Brexit. We've got the UK Chancellor and the Trade Secretary here in Davos, but be in no doubt, it is cold, and this remains a very elite part of the world. Hotel rooms here are going for $10,000 US. Apparently, there are 1,500 private planes due to land in the next couple of days, or may well have done thus far. And multinationals are handing away free cups of tea and coffee and soup and bobble hats and all sorts of stuff, things that many of these people, these very, very wealthy people, don't really need at all.
Well, you might need that tea, Darren. All right, thank you for that. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor there in Davos. All right, lots of things to pick out in that segment. John, I'll start with you. We have a reaction to Bolsonaro. He is there at a forum where he can engage with the world's leaders, but at the same time, I think other leaders are not sure how to engage with him. So how does one talk to a guy like Bolsonaro?
Bolsonaro's statement there hit the nail on the head of exactly what a lot of people in Davos would want to hear. It also, he had some controversy relating to Germany as well previously, where Deutsche Bank said, actually, Bolsonaro will be the best bet as the Brazilian president, because he can stabilize things from an economic point of view. So if Bolsonaro keeps on talking about opening up Brazil's economy, clamping down on corruption, he will have a welcome audience. There are two very much worse parts about Bolsonaro, his attitude towards human rights and his attitude towards the environment, which go directly against all of these things about sustainability that Davos is supposed to care about. So if he sticks to the economics, he'll get a good hearing. Where if I were a critic of Bolsonaro, I'd push very much on the human rights and the environmental issues, where he's really, really awful.
I mean, Kenneth Roth there was bringing up this rise of populism and Bolsonaro being the poster boy of that. I mean, is that you see that as a danger, even if Bolsonaro can bring about economic prosperity there?
The rise in populism is, I would say, a challenge rather than a danger, because it's a challenge because I get the feeling that a lot of traditional governments or a lot of traditional political parties haven't really figured out how to actually address populism and how to counteract populist parties. And there where the challenge lies. It can become a danger if there is not a proper counter-action to populist parties. But it is a fact. We're seeing populist parties on the rise, and I think it is high time for the traditional parties and for other politicians to come up with something different on the table. And this brings me to the last point that was made. The fact that Davos is a bit of an elite place, and we're speaking about elitists, and this is something that has been making the rounds also on the media. And that's where the problem lies, in my opinion. If we continue in this train of thought, where we have the elite at some place and the normal people at another place, and there is this gap, which is increasing, then we'll end up in a situation where, yes, we will have a danger on our hands that we need to address ASAP.
And again, populism and nationalism could rise. But at the same time, I do like to bring up another point, because we talk about populism as if it were a phase that could just go away or a danger. But then those parties that identify with that would say, why do you call us a danger? I mean, people vote for us. So how would we react to that? Indeed, they are voted for by people.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think it's a very strange kind of Davos we have, where leaders like Emmanuel Macron is not attending because it's seen as an elitist tag. Donald Trump isn't attending because of this shutdown of the government, a great populist battle. Neither is Theresa May because of Brexit. And so, in a sense, the star of the attraction, as Darren put it, is Bolsonaro, who is a flag bearer for this. And so, to me, I think Bolsonaro will be able to say he has a huge electoral mandate and he's riding a wave of enthusiasm. But I think it's a weird year for Davos. And I think it's also strange that, in a sense, we're being told that this is a platform for challenging populism. We're being told it's a platform to encourage action on climate change. And yet we have 1,500 private jets arriving. Exactly. We have Bolsonaro, who's the star of the show, who's a climate change denier. And it's kind of, to me, it looks increasingly like it's a format in search of continuing relevance and attention, rather than really, the front line of the battle against populism or climate change.
So you don't think that the fact that these people with very clashing views being in the same place would actually, end up having to engage?
Sure. Well, I mean, look, there's two ways to look at it, right? There's one way is to say, look, you get all these people in the room, and this is the best way, if you're Kenneth Roth from Human Rights Watch, or if you're promoting this message, to really get your message out there to that group of people. But at the same time, look what the headlines are. It's about Bolsonaro. It's Bolsonaro's message. Sure. It's his statements that'll have the headlines for days. And so, I mean, it's hard to see how you balance that. And
the words that came up with what Kenneth Roth was saying with regard to Bolsonaro is exploiting people's fears, etc. And I think one of those fears would be the economic downturn that we do hear about a lot now at the World Economic Forum. I mean, all these economic concerns, they are one of the main focus in Davos that the leaders will be talking about. And the International Monetary Fund has warned about this, that the global economy is not growing as fast as anticipated. Well, the group it forecast pointing to several risks, a weaker than expected economic growth in 2018, notably in Europe and in Asia, which we've seen. Trade tensions, especially between the US and China, the world's biggest economies. Turkey's contracting growth and a sharper than expected slowdown in China, and a no-deal Brexit, which we have been talking about a lot. Now, the IMF chief, Christine Lagarde, she talked about those concerns in Davos, and this is what she had to say.
The bottom line is that after 2 years of solid expansion, the world economy is growing more slowly than expected. Now, does that mean that a global recession is around the corner? No. But the risk of a sharper decline in global growth has certainly increased. Add to this the uncertainty, the geopolitical worries, and disappointing long-term growth prospect, and you have an economic picture with a pretty clear message.
Okay, we have had a laundry list there of potential issues. Which of these are the biggest risks, in your opinion?
The one, as I see it, that is the most unpredictable is the no-deal Brexit one, because that is coming up now in just a few weeks, potentially. So we're going to know about that one sooner or later. The longer-term ones, I fear, is what's going to happen in the United States' trade relationships with the rest of the world. Does Donald Trump row back from his populist rhetoric on international trade, or does he keep on pursuing that line and keeps on trying to bulldoze his way forward? So that one is one that I would see as a much longer-term concern. What is the United States' future trade role going to look like? We're very far away from having any answers for, I think, at least 1.5 to 2 years on that point. So that's how I would see that.
And do you think, Miriam, that Europe is prepared in the event of another downturn as bad as what we have seen, or worse?
I'm afraid that we might not be actually prepared for it, considering that we're speaking about the no-deal Brexit, which I see as the major issue for the European Union, not only for the UK economy. And we're seeing how much vulnerable are these economies. Just one change in one part of the world can have this massive impact on having a slowdown or a downturn into our economies, and that will have an impact on our people in their different member states, in their constituencies, in the villages and towns where they live. And I'm afraid that many times we take things too for granted, not necessarily looking at these impacts that can happen on a wider scale and how these are then translated into our people's everyday lives. We've been seeing what's happening in France, and I feel many times that that is just the tip of the iceberg, and that it can happen in many other member states under different forms, and that leaders somehow feel that if they are going in a positive economic environment, they do not see what is round the corner, and we try to actually, you know, ride the wave for a longer period of time.
Is that to say that Europe learned nothing? I mean, it was a pretty long economic downturn. We're still recovering from it. And are there no lessons?
Well, look, I think Christine Lagarde made it very clear that we're not going to see a kind of a catastrophic recession of the kind we saw in 2009, 2010. It's more...
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, but it's more likely we're going to see a kind of a period of sustained slow growth that will disappoint people's expectations of rising incomes and quality of life. If you think, you know, for the last 10 years, we've been living in this strange moment where we've had unprecedented global liquidity, quantitative easing, and that has sort of papered over the cracks. And it has kept you know, economies going by pumping in huge amounts of liquidity into their economies. Even with that, we've had massive populist uprisings, huge discontent in places like France. And that period of quantitative easing is coming to an end at a time when the underlying problems are unresolved. And this, we're reaping, I think, or we're going to see reaped now, potentially, the damage that's been lying, as you say, unresolved for some time.
Yeah, and when that money stops coming in, and then I'll give you the last word into what to expect when quantitative easing does stop, and then we finally see what Europe is about economically.
But look at the types of people that I agree with all what the two have just said. Look at the people that get impacted by that. Trump's trade war is decreasing the United States' manufacturing exports. It's people in the Rust Belt, some of the poorest communities which are impacted. The danger of no-deal Brexit, that's going to hit British manufacturing industry, again, in some of the poorer parts of the country. So it's going to be the big cities with dynamic economies which will largely be fine. It's going to be those very same people who are already in a precarious situation, if this goes badly, who are going to be hit even worse. And so there's a redistribution problem there as well.
Right. Okay, when we are watching Davos, and even here we're talking about the issues that come out from Davos, we hear from politicians, from activists, from big names, big personalities. But what about young people? Young people who are watching far away from the picturesque slopes. Well, Alex Morgan and our team at theCUBE have that part of the story. Alex?
Well, Tessa, yes, of course. Part of bringing you all voices, of course, the voices of people who are not attending this forum. One thing I think that is very interesting is the effort of Davos to put 6 what they call global shapers, that's young people, millennials, at the heart of their discussions in an attempt at least to be showing that young people are part of this global conversation. But one thing that has got people talking, part of this conversation, is this, a report from UNICEF, a poll. 10,000 young people, they say, took part in this online poll with a clear message to world leaders. We want jobs and we want education. Now, reading into it, that is what UNICEF say the next generation are calling out for. Safe jobs with the changing nature of work and education to finally allow people from backgrounds who've not been able to get education to access the schooling they need to be able to have their careers. Now, we have here in theCUBE spoken to 4 young people. It's worth saying some of them are indeed part of this Davos outreach, these global shapers. One of those is Veronique here. She's attending, and she actually met with UNICEF, who did that poll. This is what she had to say.
My key focus point of work are jobs creation and education. I'm very happy to be part of the Davos Forum this year because those 2 topics have been very much talked about during the forum so far. Yesterday we had a very amazing meeting with UNICEF head Henrietta Ford, and we were able to discuss how we can come up with a formal agreement to ensure that more jobs are being created.
So there's an idea there, a formal agreement, she's saying there. But also somebody else who's there, who is one of the speakers who's taking taking part of this in this moderation protest is process is Bassema. She's from Iraq. She's one of the 6, if you like, principal global shapers. This is what she had to say about this whole new process.
Years old. So we might not be on the stage where the concerns and ideas of young people has been well received by decision makers, but I believe this is a great step forward.
So a step forward, but still not quite at the stage where necessarily young people are being listened to as they should. Then we've got Alaric here. He's from India. He works in Paris. And for him, obviously, this is away from the steps of Davos, the slopes of Davos. This is Alaric here. Now, he says the changing nature of work means the next generation needs to be equipped with the skills to be able to deal with this. This is what Alaric had to say.
Considering the fact that 85% of the jobs that will be available in 2030 haven't been invented yet, we need to think of preparing the next generation of leaders to respond to challenges as they come up, which means real problem solving.
Real problem solving. And just finally, when it comes to the nature of work, this is what a lot of young people are talking about. Carolina here, she says, OK, fine, new notion, all this focus on productivity, well, work is changing. And she says, because millennials are always connected, they're burning out.
Increasingly, my generation is burnt out. We're expected to work increasingly harder and to always be on. So I think, although productivity is important, I always feel like it's almost a way to ask our people to work harder. So if we do work harder, there also need to be measures in place to make sure that it doesn't impact on our mental health.
So you get their sense of the all voices as the world of work is changing. Young people want the world leaders to get things ready for the days of tomorrow.
Thank you for that to Alex and our team in the Cube. I'll get a quick reaction from you, Miriam. These young people are asking for basic things, jobs, and giving them a future and education. What do you have to say to that?
I like in particular the last statement that work is changing, because it's true, work is changing everywhere. What we knew was the format of work a few years ago is changing today. It will change even more in the future. And unfortunately, I feel that we're not addressing that transition. And we need to make sure, and it's up to governments. They can't leave it up to businesses to actually help the transition. It's up to governments to have the proper policies in place and guide that transition, where we want to go 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, and not let that change happen, and then try and educate our young people for new jobs that they are not skilled for.
Yeah,
and I would like to see much more of a discussion on that.
Be ahead of the curve, basically,
Exactly.
rather than wait for it to happen. All right, we have a lot more coming up on Raw Politics. France and Germany, they renew their vows, trying to pave the way for a European army. Plus, China landed on the moon, the US wants to go to Mars, and now Europe says it's stepping up its game. Are we on the verge of a new space race? Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, France and Germany, they made a big public pledge of solidarity to each other today by signing a new friendship treaty. President Emmanuel Macron and Chancellor Angela Merkel met in the German city of Aachen exactly 56 years after the former enemies signed a historic pact in Paris. It promises deeper economic, military and cultural ties between France and Germany, while standing up against the rise of populism. However, critics argue that there is nothing new in the treaty and that the two countries need to be bolder to ensure that Europe's voice is heard around the world. All right, with me in the studio to dissect today's renewed alliance is French journalist and contributor for The New Statesman, Pauline Bach. We have Latvian MEP and Vice Chair of the European Conservatives and Reformists, Robert Zille. And back with me is Andrew Byrne, EU correspondent for the Sunday Times. All right, when we look at this Franco-German event today, I'll start with you. Robert, is it symbolic, or is there really substance here that we should be celebrating?
I know those who organized it, for them it's symbolic. I think it's very much aimed to internal political issues in France and Germany, and also some kind of message to the counterparties here in European level politics. But, well, I'm not sure that it was very symbolic for the rest of the European Union.
What is it for the rest of the European Union? Is it
I think
annoying?
it's some worries about how it will work, because I think Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Mr. Maas, he said that with this symbolic treaty we have to fight for stronger Europe. What does it mean to fight with whom? And where we are ending at the end, does it mean that in the future only for Europe and the Union would be good, only what is good for France and Germany? That doesn't fit for most of the other countries.
I mean, on the other hand, we talk about this strong alliance, but in fact they're in very weak positions. Macron is weak, Angela Merkel will be out in a few years. I mean, they're not exactly the best ones to lead Europe. Is that a fair assessment to make?
It is. I mean, Macron's not in a great position at the moment. He's just launched this great national debate. He's trying to, have a dialogue with his own country, really, his own people. And it's working to some extent, but...
And who are they to tell other European countries how to,
exactly,
to move forward when they can't solve their own problems?
And it's not just tell other countries to move forward. It's also, well, show our own friendship, just a Franco-German friendship. It's a bit like, well, here we are, just the two of us. It's always been about this couple because they're both founding member states, but we're at this point when we are 27 now, and maybe we should try and make new alliances and talk to other people, not just ourselves.
But it's just like an old club, isn't it? It's like the old Europe. We're seeing...
It is. It strikes me. I mean, no one does symbolism like France and Germany, and they like these great ceremonies, and there's stamps and treaties and signatures, but it's kind of a pale imitation of the real thing, and it's meant to kind of echo the famous 1963 Élysée Treaty between the two countries, which was a real sort of founding moment.
But in the context of today, doesn't it isolate everybody else?
Absolutely. What's changed is that the EU is now a club of 28 countries rather than the much smaller grouping it was before. And also the substance, the actual level of ambition in this treaty is,
they do
as
want
the
an
report
army.
showed. Well, I mean, again, we've discussed this before.
Very funny. I know we have.
Like rhetorical statement about armies. In substance, there's very little there that's actually encouraging or impressive. And I think increasingly it's going to be, it's just not possible for the Franco-German motor, which I think many states always looked at suspiciously and warily in the past. But now in a group of 28, where you have other alliances, you've got the Visegrad group of Central European countries, you've got the new Hanseatic League of liberal states. And so this is a real problem because...
So should they be, I'll ask you that, should they be reaching out to the East?
I'm belonging to New Hanseatic, my country belonging to New Hanseatic League.
Yes, it is.
But we are not making some kind of treaty symbolic from the, 14th century or 15th century.
No, you're actually getting the job done.
No, for sure. Sure, but should France and Germany be reaching out a lot more to the East, let's say?
Well, then we have to look what this is. There is economical part in the treaties. There are the military and defense part, and also some kind even language issues on this treaty, Aachen, which was have signed. And I think all of them are also aimed to some direction. But if you were looking how it works in real life, in economy, for example, Germany, actually Angela Merkel, for many years didn't support Macron's ideas since he became a president of France. And at the same time, we are looking to military and defense issue, which is very important for my area, from Baltic states, for Poland. For us, it's important how this possible increase of defense capacity on European level will help security in our area. And we had some doubts, honestly speaking, and the treaty will not give us more doubts, because if we are looking at real life, for example, Minsk Treaty, Ukraine-Russia issue, Germany and France didn't deliver anything.
No, they didn't. Okay, very
yeah, I mean,
quickly.
If you look at this from Germany and Paris's perspective, they look at this as a kind of a Gulliver's dilemma. They're the giants tied down by the Lilliputian small states.
Yeah.
And their argument, which has some merit, is that the EU will never make great leaps forward if those two can plough forward and have others come in behind.
That was the question I was going to ask. Last word, do they need to be bolder and find a new way of moving Europe forward? Just very quickly, because we don't have time.
I think so. I think they should be talking to other countries, and they should be making new alliances, and not just. Are we still at the time when we have to renow our own vows? Like, we need to go beyond that, and we need to talk to new members.
To move forward, basically. All right, let's move forward, because now if there's one European leader we know, actually, who won't support France in the alliance, it is Italian Deputy Prime Minister Luigi DeMaio. In this latest squabble between the two countries, DeMaio is blaming the French government, in fact, for the migration crisis. He's calling it a modern-day colonizer, calling France, that is. So let's take a look at today's You Said It.
Io mi sono stancato di parlare degli effetti dell'immigrazione, voglio cominciare ad affrontare le cause. Parlo di quegli stati europei che invece in questi anni, come la Francia, stampando una moneta per 14 stati come quelli africani, si è avvantaggiata anche delle importazioni delle materie prime. Il problema è che poi i migranti arrivano sulle coste italiane. Allora, finché non si risolve questo problema, noi chiederemo all'Europa di affrontare il tema della decolonizzazione dell'Africa, che non è mai finita. E per quanto la Francia sia uno Stato dell'Unione Europea, sia un paese dell'Unione Europea, non possiamo, assolutamente, non possiamo però fingere che non ci siano queste dinamiche.
Okay, just to clarify, the point he was making there is that France is keeping Africa poor, and therefore Africans want to come to Europe. And he was talking about the currency, which is backed, the peg to the euro is backed by France. So that is what DeMaio was referring to in terms of colonizing. I'll ask you, does he have a point?
Wow. I think there's this point. I mean, yeah, the migrants go to Italy because Italy is closer. So in that sense, if Italy does not get support from the EU, I understand why Italy is angry. I mean, and that's the basic of how the migration policy of the EU works, and that needs to be worked on. So I think it's more about migration than about colonization, but he's got a point about the technicalities of Africa being colonized by everyone in Europe.
So is France at fault? Can France be blamed in some ways?
Well, we have to go more deeply inside of this. If Italian government have details and figures that most of immigrants coming from the former French colonies, which are using still francs, but as said, then we have to more deep. If it's not true that it's also from Nigeria, for example, it was not French colony in the former times. There are a lot of immigrants coming.
But also, I think I'd like to point out that migration is such an emotional topic here, especially for Italy being at the forefront of this, bearing the brunt of this, which is why we see that reaction.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, on the face of it, this is sort of DeMaio pointing out that this is kind of a conflict between Italy and France must take its responsibilities. But what's actually going on here? What's actually going on here is this is a competition between the two governing Italian parties, the League and the Five-Star Movement. The League has seen its popularity surge. It's above about a third in the polls. The Five-Star Movement are struggling to stay relevant ahead of imminent elections. And so it's only rational, if not necessarily ethical or honest, for DeMaio to say, we want a piece of this anti-immigrant pie, and we're going to blame France for it. We're going to position ourselves as the defenders of Italy. It's worth bearing in mind as well that the Italians are not exactly angels in their dealings in North Africa over the last few decades.
Absolutely. Well to point that out. All right, now stay with us because we do have a lot more after the break on Raw Politics. We are going into space. The European Union says it is stepping up its game as the world's second space power. But what's driving this move? Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, China has its eyes on the moon, while the US has ambitions for Mars and its Space Force. But what about Europe? The Commission wants to look into the creation of a European Space Council and the possibility of its own Space Force. Now, here's what Elizaveta Bierkowska, European Commissioner for the Single Market, Industry and Entrepreneurship, had said today.
Space will be the infrastructure, as I said, for telecom, for Internet of Things, for application, for connected cars. And we, as we repeat on and on, everyone here also at the conference and the room, about European independence, about European autonomous access to space. Can we afford not to participate in this race?
Well, earlier this month, China showed its own desire to be considered one of the world's major powers in space exploration. And when they became the first country to successfully land a probe on the far side of the moon, China's Chang'e 4 probe sent back pictures of the previously unexplored landscape. While President Trump escalated the space race further by saying that the U.S. military might build its own space force.
When it comes to defending America, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space.
And joining me now, we have Andrew Byrne, still with us from the Daily Telegraph, John Haworth, a British Labour Party MEP, and John Worth, lecturer in EU negotiations at the College of Europe. You wanted to say something? Yeah, well, all right, first, I want to go into this story and talk to you, John, because you are sitting in the Committee for the Budget on Space. Does Europe really need this new Space Council or be part of this new race to be a dominant force in space?
Well, there's not really a space race, is there? Because that implies the same destination. But there is a race to be competitive in technology and to maintain a position where Europe can develop its industries autonomously. And the space programme contributes to that. And one of the things that I think the Commissioner has pinned down is the need for Europe to act together and to make decisions reasonably quickly. And behind this is the question of whether the European Union, are we going to make the kind of decisions that enable Europe to be in these games and to be the vehicle for delivering what member states can't deliver on their own?
But John, you seem to be disagreeing when the commissioner was speaking. What are you disagreeing about?
I was rather sceptical about her soundbite about how space exploration was necessary for the future of our connectedness and the future of the Internet of Things, she said, for example, and connected cars. Sorry, but what has the space race exactly got to do with the future of connected cars? So I think we need to make sure that if the European Union is to be present here, it needs to be clear what for, and not just think this is something that because other major geopolitical areas are active in,
just to
that
suggest,
we need to do.
What about satellites? Maybe that's what she was referring to. You know, it is technology that you need to be out there.
Yes, but I think she was
that's getting into the
carried away.
detail. But but the point is, should Europe be in space? Or Andrew, I'll give you that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I should say before my editor calls me and I get fired that I work for the Sunday Times.
Yes, the Sunday Times. Sorry.
But no, I mean, on this one, I'm inclined to agree with John, and I think it's such a hard sell at the moment when Europe faces so many tangible problems that people can understand in their daily lives to sell this message of why investment in space is necessary. And I'm sure there are good reasons, but how do you make this tangible to voters who are angry about the carbon tax on their petrol or their lower take-home pay or their lower disposable income? I mean, I don't think the latest statements we've seen from the EU do an awful lot to meet that communication challenge.
But isn't it important that if the US is there, if you have China there, shouldn't Europe be there? I mean, I think that was a point. I think that is a point in terms of geopolitics that Europe is making.
Yes, Europe should. But also, politicians and decision makers and commissioners and heads of state need to be effective at communicating what things like the space race deliver. Now, the US puts about $19 billion into its space program and another 23 billion or thereabouts from a military standpoint, and estimates that it gets around about 60 billion back from it through the value that it produces in technology and related things. And, you know, you don't always know in a research program what the outputs are going to be. But I do know if we don't do this kind of work, we will not be at the forefront and we'll become dependent on the other major powers. And, you know, there is a world space industry, but there needs to be European technology that supports us.
So you are saying we are in a new space race?
I'm saying we're in the space game.
What's the difference?
Well, a race produces one goal and one destination.
Right.
For example, like the moon. There was never really a race to get to the moon, but there was a space project that two then powers developed independently with different targets, and they ended up contributing, partly because of changes in geopolitics, to a common development of space technology.
So it is a game with several winners that you see. I'm not sure, though, that the US and China see it that way. Perhaps they probably see a winner in all this. I don't know. Would you see that?
I think so. And I think Europe, at the moment, should not partake in that. It should be done, I agree with John here, that if there are practical, economic, concrete gains which can be achieved from this, sure. If this is essentially to say Europe, as in the new geopolitics of China versus the United States versus Europe, we need to have an adequate space industry, then I'm much more sceptical.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it at that. All right, stay with us here on Raw Politics. We are going to tell you next how you can be on our new call-in show. To get in touch using the number, which will pop up on your screen soon enough. And we are asking you, should referendums be banned in Europe? Do stick around to find out more. There it is, the information. Back to our politics, and here on the program we talk to a lot of journalists and politicians. What about you? We want to know what you're thinking. Stick around at 7 p.m. CET for your chance to call in and tell us what is on your mind when it comes to the big stories of the day. You can phone in at 800-333-3700. You can also email us at rawpaul@euronews.com. It's all on your screen. Let us know what you think and use the hashtag #RawPolitics on Twitter and Facebook. And you can also Skype us and connect under the username rawpolitics, all one word. All right, so who will be joining me on your call? We will have my co-presenter, Shona Murray, our Brussels correspondent for Euronews. We will be welcoming Jacqueline Foster, British MEP and Deputy Leader of the Conservatives in the European Parliament. And staying with us for that as well is Andrew Byrne from the Sunday Times. All right, I want to bring up the questions that we will have for you on tonight's show. We have important questions for you. Does Europe, first of all, have a hate problem in France that is responsible for Europe's migration crisis. And in light of everything going on with Brexit this week, should referendums be banned? All right, so on your screen, you see the questions that we want to ask you and for you to call in and let us know what you think. So there you go again. Phone in at 800-333-3702. Email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. All right. All these three topics that you see on your screen we'll be talking about. Let me start with the first one. Does Europe have a hate problem? Because today we had a Eurobarometer study that says that 53% of Europeans, only 53%, think that denying the Holocaust is anti-Semitic. So what about the rest? What do they think of that? And I think there are other groups that experience discrimination, not just the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and that came out in the last few years. So we're asking, does Europe have a hate problem? Do tell us what you think about that. What about you, Chona?
Well, referendums, are they the way to institute policy? Is the public actually properly informed when they're making these huge decisions? And then, as we've seen in my own
Brexit.
Well, okay, I was gonna try not to bring that up, but anyway, since you did. No, in Ireland, often they've been used to kick the government rather than actually getting people to focus their minds. So we don't want them to be banned, but are they actually that useful in terms of a democratic tool?
Sure. And Andrew, we have one more topic.
Yeah, France and its link to migration. I think Luigi DeMaio put his finger on something. I wouldn't agree with everything he said, but there's something to be said for this allegation that France is a bit of a double standard, that Emmanuel Macron presents himself as the great sort of liberal, progressive saviour, hasn't exactly got a clean record or a super pure record on migration. So is France deploying double standards?
All right, Jacqueline, you will be part of the call-in show today, getting questions on all these three topics. Which of these would you really like to talk about?
Well, I think, if I may touch on two. I think on the issue of race or xenophobia or racism, I think, and you talked about the Holocaust, I think there is clearly a gap in terms of education of young people, and older people for that matter, or people who've come to perhaps live on the continent, to see what the history actually is. I think it goes wider than all of that, as you mentioned. And obviously, if we look at Brexit or if we look at referenda, I personally have no issue with a referendum, and because I think just on occasions, it's the way to go.
Put the question to the
then
people.
All
right, we will be having but we will be having a lot of this conversation later on in your call. And again, we are letting you know how you can reach us. You can call us. The phone number is 0800-333-3702, and you can email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Just letting you know that the phone lines are open. You can start calling, in fact, and you can get in touch on Twitter. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics. Skype us. Look for Raw Politics. We are really easy to find, so do get in touch with us. All right. Now, before we go, we have time for today's Raw Moment, and it comes from Donald Tusk. In a new BBC documentary, BBC Two, that is, the President of the European Council reflects quite candidly on the Brexit referendum in 2016, and specifically on former UK Prime Minister David Cameron. Let's take a look.
I asked David Cameron, why did you decide on this referendum? It's so dangerous, so even stupid, you know. And he told me, and I was really amazed, you know, and even shocked, that the only reason was his own party, I mean the Tories, and that he felt really safe because he thought at the same time that there's no risk of referendum. Paradoxically, David Cameron became the real victim of his own victory.
Very quick reaction there, Jackie. You were talking about that. He's called it stupid referendum.
Astonishing remarks. David Cameron came to the European Union 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago, because there were clearly issues, not just in the UK, but affected the whole of Europe. And if maybe they'd have had a serious conversation or understood what the seriousness was of all of this, we might not be having the conversation about Brexit tonight. So I don't think I'll be listening too closely to what Donald Tusk says.
Okay, well, there you go. We'll leave it at that. But, you know, as always, as we have been saying here on the program, we always want to hear your views, what you think. So do tell us what you're talking about. You can reach me personally on Twitter. I am at Tessa Ercilia, or follow us at Euronews. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics, and don't forget to call. All the lines are open for Raw Politics, your call. Do get in touch with us. We are waiting for you. All right, bye for now.